Hello and welcome back to the Boxing Index podcast in association with theboxingindex.co.uk. Before I get into today's episode, I just wanted to begin by saying, according to the YouTube analytics on our account, 98% of the views on our last podcast came from people who aren't subscribed. So if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe. And while I'm plugging stuff, go give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter at Boxing Index. Right, so now I've bored you with that. In today's podcast, I'm trying out a new concept that I might continue in the future depending on how well it's received, where I discuss the boxing news of the week, whether that's fights that have happened, fights due to take place, or just interesting news outside of the ring. Today I'll be talking about the return of boxing this Friday, upcoming show announcements from Matchroom and MTK Global, the Jarrell Miller debacle, Tyson Fury and Dillian Whyte's Twitter feud, Ryan Garcia's next fight, and finally Michael Hunter being released by Matchroom. So I'll get straight into it and I hope you enjoy. First up, as I'm sure will be music to every boxing fan's ears, this Friday boxing is back. Frank Warren and Queensberry Promotions show on BT Sport will kickstart British boxing back into life. The Behind Closed Doors boxing show will be headlined by Brad Foster and James Beach. Foster's he's a good young fighter. He's coming off the back of a duo of good fights against Lucian Reed. James Beach is young as well. He's 12-0. He's not yet been tested, so he might struggle with a slight step up in level. And I guess it's not your usual headliner fight, but given the circumstances, I'd say it's a solid fight. Next up is Hamza Shiraz against Paul Keane. Shiraz looks a good young talent. He's only 21 years old. He's very tall for a super welterweight at 6'1". And obviously that's a good division to be in at the moment with the belts changing hands a lot at the top. He had a good win over Ryan Kelly last time out, and I think this fight against Paul Keane will be another solid test, but we should expect a win from him. Also on the card is a potential future star in David Adeleye, who's 23 years old, only 1-0. He helped Tyson Fury prepare for the Wilder fight, so he must have decent pedigree, and I assume that'll be where most people know him from. His opponent hasn't been announced yet, so you'd expect it to be sort of just a journeyman that he'll blow away, but I imagine that'll still be good to watch. Also on the card is Mark Chamberlain, who's also only 21 years old. I know it's a very young card overall, but yeah, there's some good prospects to watch. I actually spoke to Mark Chamberlain this week, so look out for that interview on our website coming out tomorrow at 5 p.m. And then finally, just to finish off the card, is one of Dubois' sparring partners, Krasmaru, who's 27-year-old Ukrainian. I've not really heard anything about him before. He seems to have just sort of been thrown on there to fill the card. He's 2-0. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's the best card in the world, but it's definitely a good opportunity to see some young British talents who would otherwise be fighting at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon before anyone's really watching. And I guess given the circumstances, you can't really expect too much. But I expect, like most people, I'm just excited to have some boxing back anyway to watch again in this country. Also announced recently was Matchroom Boxing and Eddie Hearn's fight camp. They announced all 20 fights at once, or I think 19, maybe they missed out one. It's 4 weeks, 5 fights per card, culminating in the White versus Povetkin pay-per-view. There's some great ones on there, and personally I really like the looks of week 1, which is headlined by Sam Eggington and Ted Cheeseman, and then week 4, which obviously, as I said, is headlined by White and Povetkin. I don't want to go into too much detail about the specific fights on the cards because I'll cover that in a special Fight Camp podcast closer to the time, and I'll be writing an article specifically about the White versus Povetkin fight, so look after that. But one thing which I did think might be worth talking about that happened this week is the Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano controversy that's been taking place. It was meant to be the chief support for the White versus Povetkin card on week 4, and I actually posted an article yesterday going into more depth, so you can go check that out on our website at boxingindex.co.uk if you want, but I'll explain it briefly here. So the fight, it was originally agreed for May 2nd, and then it was moved to July, and then finally rescheduled to the August 22nd date at Fight Camp. And there's a clause in the contract which allows Matchroom to do this, allows them to reschedule the fight. But what's come out was that Amanda Serrano was offered to go on a reality show called Exatlon. I've probably pronounced that wrong, but it's on the Puerto Rican TV network, Telemundo. and the dates clashed with the rescheduled fight. So Hearn alerted Telemundo, and they swiftly dropped Serrano to avoid legal action. This inevitably annoyed Amanda Serrano, as who wouldn't rather have a free holiday than train for 8 weeks to get punched in the face? I may be wrong, but this seems to be the overriding issue for the fight not happening. Other issues, such as Amanda Serrano struggling to train in New York because of coronavirus, but then Katie Taylor is also in New York, so that one doesn't make too much sense. And then Eddie Hearn also asked Amanda Serrano to take less money for the fight, which I'm guessing didn't help the situation. But in fairness, he offered the full amount after she declined. And then there was basically just a lot of back and forth on Twitter and through various interviews on some YouTube channels, and I'm assuming privately between their teams. Amanda Serrano is promoted by Ludi Bella, so he was involved as well. And then when Hearn realised the fight wasn't happening, he asked for the $10,000 advance payment that he'd given to Amanda Serrano to cover her camp costs back. And this seemed to have been the final straw for their camp, as they released it. Amanda Serrano and her team released a statement after that where they ended it by saying, "I've read from many that Mr. Hearn was a horrible person. Now I know firsthand he's actually worse than that." For the record, I've got all of this info from Twitter and various interviews and statements from both camps, so if I've got anything wrong, let me know. But it just seems to me that this was just all handled way too publicly, and it was bound to end up like this. It was like in the past with the Joshua Wilder negotiations, how everyone was just doing a bit too much talking, and I think when these things are handled behind the scenes, then they can sort of come to better agreements, but when it's public, everyone's just trying to one-up each other, and it just doesn't really work. So I think at this point, there's probably too much bad blood between the camps for this fight to happen definitely on August 22nd, but maybe even ever. Obviously, I hope that's not the case. It'd be a great fight, and one I definitely want to see. In terms of replacements, it looks like the Pursoon rematch is the front runner, or there's also the WBA mandatory Miriam Gutierrez. But obviously, that's not as high profile a fight, so the card would need strengthening in other areas as it's pay-per-view. So Eddie Hearn said that in an interview that it would need strengthening. Finally, in terms of fight announcements, MTK Global also announced 3 shows. John O'Carroll is fighting on August 11th, and he's probably the biggest name out of all the cards. So I'm looking forward to that, as he's always exciting to watch. There's also Akeem Ennis-Brown is also featured fighting on September 1st. I'm looking forward to that one as well, as he looks like a good prospect. And like with Fight Camp, I'll have a podcast going further in depth on these shows close to the time, so I won't go into too much detail now. Probably the biggest news of the week has been that Jarrell Miller has found to be taking performance-enhancing drugs again on his what was meant to be his return to boxing since being dropped from the Anthony Joshua fight last year for taking performance-enhancing drugs. There's lots of people in boxing calling for life bans for this, and maybe it is time to make an example of someone, but I do think if you're going to do that, then the sport definitely needs more consistency, as too many people normally get away with minimal bans. So then it might look unfair on him, but I think I agree he should get a harsh sentence, but then you need to start doing that with other people too. But then I guess, in terms of other bans, I guess Miller's case is exceptional, as the first time he took 3 different substances, some of which have to be injected, so that can't really have been a mistake. This time the substance is called GW1516, which apparently aids endurance, and I don't really know enough about it, but if it's something that can be taken, I don't know if it's something that can be taken by accident, but given his track record, I would be surprised if this was an accident. He's saying info will come out later on to clear his name, and obviously you have to be careful with those kind of situations because of the Dillian Whyte case we saw last year, when it turned out that he was actually telling the truth. But yeah, Jarrell Miller said this last time too, so it's difficult to believe him this time. There's some people out there, including Eddie Hearn, saying that he has a mentality issue where he's just not confident enough to fight without performance-enhancing drugs, and so he almost relies on them, which would be sad, but I guess potentially true. And then there's rumours going around that he's been doing this kind of thing throughout his career, and obviously I can't personally say whether that's true or not. I think it's a shame for him, but I don't think the heavyweight division will necessarily miss him, as it's in great shape at the moment. There are plenty of contenders to keep us entertained, and even if he doesn't face a lengthy ban, I would be surprised if any big management companies, promoters, or networks are willing to work with him after this, because it's obviously the second time he's done it. And I think he actually did it before when he used to kickbox. I think I heard that. I might be wrong though. Although I guess in boxing, money talks louder than anything else. So if there is an audience for him, maybe someone will take that leap. But it would have to be willing. It would have to be someone willing to get a lot of backlash, because people wouldn't be happy. The main thing that I think you can take from this is I really think this incident highlights the need for more regulation and a governing body in boxing, because it's so chaotic that no one can really ban him. As in, you can have separate commissions that can ban him in their state or country, but there's not a universal body that can really create a rule book for how to deal with doping in boxing. And I'll actually be doing a bit more research on that and writing a more in-depth article on that topic soon, so look out for it on the Boxing Index website. Also grabbing headlines this week was the Tyson Fury and Dillian Whyte Twitter spat. They've been arguing over Twitter non-stop over the last week, and I think it all mainly stems from the fact that Whyte is just frustrated, and rightfully so, by his treatment from the WBC. And obviously Tyson Fury is the WBC world title holder in the heavyweight division at the moment, which means that's where Whyte sees his shot coming from. Dillian Whyte has to have one of the best resumes in the division, and there's no doubt that he deserves a title shot. There's been much worse men who've had title shots. There's even Dominic Breazeale, who's had 2 world title shots, and he has nowhere near the resume that Dillian Whyte has. I haven't actually gone through all of the tweets that they've been sending each other, as there are quite a lot, so I'm not sure exactly what they're arguing about, but it seems like it's just standard trash talking. But I did listen to Dillian Whyte's interview on BBC Radio 5 Live Boxing with Costello and Bunce, and one thing he said that I did find interesting is that if he fought Fury, he would really target the body. And although that sounds simple and shouldn't come as too much of a surprise considering his nickname is the Body Snatcher, I think it's interesting when you really think about it, a lot of heavyweights do headhunt, because they go for the big spectacular knockouts, and that was especially the case in the first Wilder Fury fight. Wilder was definitely, he didn't go anywhere near Fury's body. And then, Whyte made the point on the podcast that if Fury might not have had the strength to get up in that 12th round had Wilder targeted the body more. And obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that with that tactics Whyte's going to beat Fury, but at least he's looking at doing something different that people haven't really done before against Fury, because when you consider that he's gone 31 fights unbeaten, then you need someone to go in there and do something a bit different. But yeah, either way, Whyte deserves the Fury fight for the WBC title before anyone else, in my opinion, even if more people do want to see the Joshua versus Fury fight for the undisputed title. The next bit of news was something that I found quite exciting, which was that on the same week, Ryan Garcia, who's the 21-year-old Golden Boy prospect / social media star, and he was ordered by the WBC to fight Luke Campbell for the interim lightweight title, but at the same time he was ordered by the WBO to fight in a final eliminator for the lightweight title against Ghana's Emmanuel Tagoe. If he takes the WBC route, it leads to Devin Haney, who's the champion, and if he takes the WBO route, it leads to Lomachenko. I personally think the WBO seems like the easier route for him. I don't know that much about Tagoe, in fairness, but he hasn't got the same resume as Campbell, or as good a resume. He could be a good fighter, but if Garcia wins and Lomachenko beats Teofimo Lopez to become undisputed, I can see Lomachenko leaving the division, which would leave Ryan to presumably fight for a vacant title against someone I think we can assume would be not as good as Lomachenko, because there aren't many out there who are as good. I personally really like the Campbell fight. That may be a bit of bias being from England, but I think it's a great test for Garcia, who hasn't been tested yet really at all. And I think it's a great opportunity for Campbell to get another shot at a world title, and I think he really deserves to win one before he retires. Because of the relative inexperience of Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia, I think that's an achievable route for Luke Campbell to a world title. They've both had a decent number of fights. I think they both had over 20 fights, over 20 wins, but neither have been in a hard fight yet in their career, and Campbell's fought the big names in the division, and although he's come up short, he's never really looked out of place. And this might be a bold claim, but I can see him knocking out Ryan Garcia. His chin's never really been tested, And then I think the Devin Haney fight is harder to predict, so I'm not too sure how that goes, but I do think it's very winnable for Luke Campbell. Apparently, Garcia has accepted the WBC route to the title, which I think is great news. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to that fight because, although I want Luke Campbell to win, if he does beat Luke Campbell, then maybe I guess Ryan Garcia deserves the hype that he's been getting. Finally, this was a bit of a smaller story, but I did think it was a bit of a strange one from Matchroom. They released Michael Hunter. I personally think he's a good fighter, but maybe I guess Matchroom just have a lot of heavyweights, so maybe they couldn't give him the time and focus that he needs at this stage of his career. Yeah, as I said, I think he's a good fighter. His only loss has come to Usyk, which is nothing to be ashamed about, and he looked good for parts of the fight. He's got some decent names on his resume like Kuzmin and Bakoli. I thought he beat Povetkin last time out personally in Saudi Arabia, and then I guess if he had got the decision, he might have had a shot at White next. But yeah, I think he'll be snapped up by another promoter fairly quickly. I don't necessarily think he'll ever win a world title at heavyweight, but there's a lot of entertaining and lucrative matchups for him out there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where his career goes from here. Right, so that's all for today. Thanks for listening. Let us know if you enjoyed this new type of episode that I'm doing with like a more newsy feel to it, and we'll be back again next week with another podcast. If there's anything else you'd like us to discuss, leave it in the comments. And if there's any news you think I missed or any opinions you disagree with, leave them in the comments below, and I'll make sure to address them in next week's podcast. As I've been saying every week, hopefully I'll be getting guests on soon, but for now, go check out our website. We've got some good new articles coming soon, including an interview with Mark Chamberlain, who's fighting on Friday night. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Boxing Index, and go give our Facebook page a like. All of that stuff is in the description. Also, yeah, make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel. And once again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.